and be ready for Travis at the end. So I'd like to now introduce to you Travis Smith, who is the K-12 Education Lead for Microsoft Australia. And over the past 12 years, Travis has 12 years of experience in the classroom and has managed one of the first one-to-one technology programs in the country, starting in the mid-1990s. We also have, Travis and Elevo Institute Chair, Associate Professor David Loader is also here, as he too was the first principal to introduce a one-to-one laptop program in the world. So we're lucky to have David and Travis here today, who are the absolute experts in education around one-to-one laptop and technology programs. During Travis's career, he's held positions of assistant principal and lectured at Monash University in the education faculty. And he has presented many keynotes at conferences worldwide on the effective use of technology in the classroom, as well as co-facilitated events as the Worldwide Microsoft Partners in Learning Forum in Washington, DC and Prague for teachers. He is currently the education lead for Microsoft Australia, which involves managing Microsoft's education programs, professional learning experiences, and providing advice to large education jurisdictions as to the role of technology in education. Before we came online, we were having a discussion about a number of professional learnings on offer this year that Travis has been personally involved in since the beginning of the pandemic, and remote learning, and it's in the excess of the hundreds. So we're very, very lucky to have Travis with us today. And in a moment, I'm going to hand over to him and he's going to lead us through the presentation, Technology Mindsets.
Thanks very much for the intro and welcome everyone. Hopefully you can see my slides okay. Someone yell out if you can't see them. So yeah, my name's Travis Smith, background in edu, now education industry lead, which is a fantastic role at Microsoft. We spend a lot of time supporting teachers and school leaders and jurisdictions, departments of education and so forth, universities and TAFEs and everyone around the country in the use of technology. So obviously, there's probably never been a more poignant time to talk about technology mindsets than now. I think we're, be pretty kind to give a 1-star review to 2020. It's been hard, but we know that there are some positives on the horizon and some opportunities for us to do some pretty cool things in sort of changing the education narrative around technology. And we have really made some huge leaps and bounds around technology over this year. We also need to think about mindset, because there's also a lot of negative press around the impact that technology will have on people moving forward. 47% of all jobs will be automated by 2034. And there's lots of different talk about artificial intelligence taking jobs away and all those sorts of things. But one thing I will say is that we've kind of seen this thing before, and it was technology back in the day, but that's a picture of New York in 1905, and you'll notice lots of horses and things around there. And at the time, it took about 100,000 horses to keep New York working. And so 25% of all the country's agricultural output went to feeding the horses that were running basically the country at that time. And then, of course, we have a look at 20 years ahead, 1925. Not a horse in sight. And so we've seen this kind of thing before, as we've seen, industrial revolutions. We're now in the 4th industrial revolution, if you've heard about that sort of narrative. But we've kind of seen this kind of disruption go on before around the technology and its impact on moving forward. We should say, though, that I'm going to talk about some sort of really positive ideas of what technology can do with us. But there's also been, a bit of over-indexing on thinking that technology is going to be even more powerful, more poignant, and maybe more negative than we thought. This is an example of a night scope security robot that roamed around car parks and kept people safe. And if it saw some danger, it would have the orange eyes, and if it really saw something terrible going on, it would go to red eyes. And we thought that what we were going to get was, flying cars and robots protecting us, and actually what we got was suicidal robots that couldn't work out where a pond was. So we do have to temper our acknowledgement of technology innovation and where it's kind of going with the reality of, hey, it might take us a little bit longer than what we think. We're not all on hoverboards at the moment, despite what they said in Back to the Future as a prediction. When it comes to mindsets, at Microsoft, we actually use a lot of the work around growth mindset. And so I know that that's something that's really close to the work that's going on at ThinkPlus and the types of curriculum that is being used in schools. And so it's the same as in terms of our mantra. That's Satya Nadella, our CEO, who talks about growth mindset. And this is, I just pulled this out of a training deck, the kind of thing that we talk about. And so we have the same narrative. We talk about every one of our workers being a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all, having this learn-it-all culture, having this this fail fast and fail forward and learn from your mistakes, pick yourselves up and your teammates up and off you go again. And so that's something that's really ingrained in our culture at Microsoft and has been part of sort of the revolution of the company over the past 5 years. We know that as a result of the pandemic, there is going to be some new education realities, or at least we hope there might be some new education realities, because the pull of going back to the status quo is always very strong. But we think there's now an opportunity to move forward, and I'll talk about that. When we talk about transformation in education, because a lot of people sort of say to Microsoft, because we've been in the educational technology game for 40 years around the world, people sort of say, oh, you must have seen a school system where this works great, or you must have seen some examples of this, that, or that, or the other. And so what we did about 5 years ago was put together what we call the Education Transformation Framework. And basically what this is it looks at these 4 main areas you can see, and of course there's subparts under each of those. And these seem to be commonalities across large systems globally, but also across schools. If you get these things right, these are the types of conversations that they're having in really successful systems. And so that's a tool that we use to guide conversations around lots of different aspects around technology innovation in schools. One of the things that we did do during the pandemic is we partnered with the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning team and Michael Fullen, who some of you will know, and had a white paper sort of commissioned, sort of reflecting on what has gone on during this pandemic. And they came up with these 3 phases. The first phase, which we've been in and out of, is the disruption phase, the idea of quickly shutting things down, quickly getting our online learning up and running. The second thing was this sort of transition phase, which is the transition back to school, which we've done in most states around the country, and we've done again in Victoria. And the third one, which is the most exciting one, which I'd spend a bit of time talking about, is what they call the Reimagining Learning phase. And that is the opportunity to now reflect on what is it that we've done and what can we take forward. And they talk about 2 preconditions being required for a learning revolution to occur. One is that we have to sort of see the opportunities to evolve the existing education system. And that might be quite a negative thing to talk about. What are some of the challenges? We know that the current system doesn't quite fit all the students, and we know that there's some things that we could fix about the current system. The second thing, which is on the list there, is what the pandemic has given us, which it's given us a bit of a glimpse into a viable alternative that we wouldn't have had before. And so that's we're at an interesting place now where we can either grab the great things that we've done during this period and move forward, or we could go back to what we've always done before. And we're certainly hoping that more people are moving forward. And one of the ways in which we see them moving forward would be around this idea of hybrid learning. And hybrid learning, the way we sort of talk about it, is that it's everything that is the best of face-to-face practice, but also then bringing in stuff like the flip, the blended, the remote, the distance learning, all those things that we know were once upon a time the realm of kind of more of that technology-driven learning, and melding the best parts of those together. Because we know that to have a great sort of learning environment in a classroom these days also needs to be quite technology rich. And we know that there's going to be more reliance on technology moving forward, probably more of a focus on the type of one-to-one program that David and others sort of started at MLC way back in the day, because we see now that there's a serious need for this technology that could really help us move forward. We should take time to reflect on and celebrate the awesome work that teachers, school leaders, jurisdictional leaders, and others have done. I mean, running a school, a large sort of, let's say, secondary school like where I was, 1,850 plus students, 150 odd staff, and running that remotely and having every class being able to do their thing and make sure that you've got your VCE students striving for the best, it's a pretty big undertaking. So we absolutely should celebrate the work of teachers and IT teams and others in schools. We've seen this model before, and you might be familiar with it, the SAMA model. And it talks about, the way that you're applying your technology to classroom lessons, thinking about, am I just substituting, or am I augmenting, modifying, or redefining what we're doing as a result of the technology? One of the things that I don't like about this model is the narrative that follows it that says substitution is not good. I actually don't believe that. I think that if we get everyone to substitution, which I think is what the pandemic has probably got 80 to 90% of teachers now familiar with using platforms, familiar with how you could sort of structure online pedagogies, thinking about the ways that students can use their technology, thinking about how they use Teams and video calls and other bits and pieces of technology. We're really in a pretty good spot now. We're actually way ahead of where we were 12 months ago. Because now substitution is a nice little platform for us to take those mini leaps to augmentation, modification, and redefinition. The jump from nothing to substitution is huge. The jumps thereon are actually quite small. And so this model now has become more of a reality for us to focus on. And we should be really, really proud of the work that teachers have done over the course of this pandemic to get themselves sorted and get their students learning in this environment. So I want to talk a little bit about the idea of keeping in the front of our mind of how we're going to empower students. What are we actually going to do for students? How can we help them? What kind of capabilities and skills they need? How do we develop those skills? And so one of the terms you may have heard before is this idea of phygital, which is the combining of the physical and the digital worlds, and the fact that the young people these days don't really see much of a difference between those two in the way that we perhaps do. Us older people. And if you ever doubt that this is true, then next time you have a student at your school who's been bullied on social media, just tell them to shut their account down and it fixes it. They just can't do that. It's part of how they build their own self-identity. It's so ingrained in what they do. It's a way they communicate. It's a way they learn. It's a way they get entertainment. It is, they really do see that as an integral part of what it is to be human. And so there's some interesting things associated with that. One of the bits of work that was done by Prensky back in the day was talking about this idea down the bottom here of digital natives and digital immigrants. There's a study that is done called the International Computer and Information Literacy Study, which is a mouthful, and it looks at 8th grade students and their ability to truly use technology for purpose in researching and organizing ideas. And the challenge with this idea of the digital native, digital immigrant expressions is that we often think, oh, they're digital natives, they'll be fine. They can do all this stuff. And the research says, no, they can't. We still need to teach them how to do this. As a matter of fact, only 2% of the 42,000 students across 14 countries in this study could reach the highest level and work independently with technology to gather and manage info and do so with precision and evaluative judgment. And only 20% or 19% could get lower level than that, which was that they could use computers to gather information, information gathering and management tools on computers. So we're not as well positioned as we might think. And it's the same as when I used to teach at Monash. We had student teachers come through. Lots of people were like, oh, they'll be fine. They're so native now and they've all got Facebook and yada, yada, yada. And so when we were training the new teachers, some people were like, we don't need to worry about it. And I was sort of like, no. The difference between using a piece of technology for a personal use and learning how to implement it in pedagogy is a whole different. And we need to make sure that we are really training people on the difference between those. But the same goes with student capabilities and skills. One of the other things that the pandemic has shown is that some students have just gone miles ahead and others have really slipped behind with the remote learning that we experienced. And in Victoria, where I am, it's been quite a significant period of remote learning. But I realised that in and still remote learning in some countries. But I realize in some other states, I think Queensland was only 4 weeks or something like that. So, but some students have really gone ahead, and we did some have seen some research in that paper I mentioned before, which talks about some students who found that they had more choice and voice, exceeded expectations in the way that they would collaborate with others and the way that they would help themselves, finding ways to help themselves get their work done. More organized kids. The other thing that we found too is around self-regulation. Self-regulation I describe as the idea of knowing where I'm starting in my learning journey, knowing where I've got to end, and then plotting that path myself of how I'm going to get there. And many students can't do that. And it seems to be a skill that is almost trained out of kids as they go into high school. And the reason is because high schools are structured, as you know, very differently to primary schools. Primary schools, there's longer periods of time to work on tasks and to make sure things are sort of flowing and an integrated curriculum and all that. And at secondary, it sort of turns into, at many schools, the idea of 45-minute blocks of time about different subjects. And so it's harder to do these sort of longer tasks. And so this self-regulation thing is a really important muscle that we need to build now we're going back into school. We need to keep top of mind of what kind of capabilities or skills we might need our students to have. And so we think about these soft skills, or whatever we want to call them. There's an approach called 21CLD, which is called 21st Century Learning Design. And it was developed by researchers a little while ago, about 8 years ago. And it really is about training teachers of how do they develop curriculum that, based on evidence, is going to build muscle in the 21st century skills. And so a little illustration of kind of the challenge around 21st century skills. I was doing some education consulting once I finished working at my school. And I was sitting in my hotel room before I was going in to meet with the leadership team the following day around their technology use, and all I wanted to talk about was what are they going to buy and how they're going to implement. And I said, slow down, we've got to talk about some bigger picture stuff. That's not, that's like step 19 if there were 20 steps. And so I looked at that paragraph in their prospectus and I said, they aim to develop effective communicators who engage in high-level critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, teamwork. Students are encouraged to be self-directed, ethical, and responsible. And so I sort of went, wow, you've mentioned all of the, all of the skills in a paragraph. And so after I built some rapport with them, I said, what are the evidence-based teaching and learning strategies that you're using at your school so that you could guarantee that my son or daughter build those skills? And that's a pretty annoying question because then they're sort of like, oh yeah, well, what we do a lot of group work, and it's a pretty tough question. And one of the reasons it's a tough question is because back in the day, there was something like 76 different versions of what these skills even are. And so in this piece of research that was done, it's called the Innovative Teaching Learning Research, which I'm not even sure if that's there at that site's live anymore, so apologies for that. But they sort of distilled down and came up with these ones as the common threads amongst most of those 76. As a matter of fact, there was sort of 77 because then the capabilities of the national curriculum came out, which is basically another kind of set of these kinds of skills. And so you can see there that self-regulation, which I was talking to, is one of those. And so they did this big piece of research, and they went into, what I liked about it was they actually went into classrooms and they talked to teachers and they visited schools, and they did this across many countries. They looked at 967 samples of learning activities teachers were giving kids, and then 3,300 examples of work that came back as a result. And they did this across all of these countries, of which New South Wales Department of Education were part of this. But you can see it's like Senegal and Finland and other places around the world. Some findings out of that showed that when we think about our technology use, most of the stuff you can see down the bottom there that kids were doing with technology was finding information on the internet, practicing routines and taking tests and turning in homework and writing stories. And so unfortunately, when we sort of parallel that to something like Bloom's digital taxonomy, we don't see as much of the higher order stuff going on here with technology. It seems to be an information sourcing medium and doing some pretty low level stuff, but not getting up to those higher realms. And it was consistent across all different countries, including Australia, these findings. some of the findings were students only learn these future skills when educators structure learning activities that require them. Well, that kind of makes sense, right? If you ask a student to write a poem and put it on the desk before they leave, they'll probably write a poem and put it on the desk before you leave. So they do what we set them. The challenge is for teachers is that these skills are not clearly defined, and there's no clear idea of how do I design associated learning activities that are going to build these muscles in kids. And so in this approach, these were the skills that we saw before: collaboration, problem solving, skill communication, ICT use, knowledge construction, and self-regulation. The real question is, how do we design learning activities that develop these capabilities or skills? And so one of the things that were there in this toolkit was the idea of a decision tree. You know, does it meet this? No, then you get 0 points. Does it? Yes, then go down to the next one, so on and so forth. So here's an idea for collaboration, because collaboration is an interesting skill set. And we often think, you know, we'll just put the kids in a group and they'll learn it. Well, the science says, no, they probably won't. We need to be a bit more scientific in our approach about how we do this. And so the first step really is about collaborating informally, because there's lots of informal collaboration that they do. Do they have shared responsibility for the outcome of the task? That builds on the amount in which they have to practice collaboration. They also collaborate more if you set them substantive decisions to make. That is, big decisions, which take some argy, that require some negotiation, that make a bit of an argument between some of them. All the things that are very real world when we work in teams. And the last one is this idea of their work being interdependent. And interdependent basically means if one of your group of 4 kids can go off to the sport camp for 3 days and all you say is, don't worry, mate, we'll catch up when you get back, then you probably never had to collaborate together in the first place. So it's not really a rich task that is forcing it. And so then you think about knowledge construction, which is the idea of what happens beyond a research project. Are they actually building significant ideas? Are they finding patterns and connecting ideas? Are they applying that learning to a new context? You know, these are sort of checklists, if you like, for teachers to reflect on the ways that they're building muscle in these capabilities. ICT for learning, I mean, this one's really important for us, is the idea that learners have to have an opportunity to use IT before they even get down the list. But this is the next stage, which is, unless you are using the technology to construct some knowledge, it doesn't count. It's not really a great use of technology, because it may as well be a bit of paper or watch a TV or put a DVD on, or, you know, I mean, they're all technology, but it's not really that computer technology. And so lots of research has been done on this, and lots of schools have used this approach, and you start to see some pretty interesting building of capabilities. And there are lots of ways that you can use this. You know, for example, some schools use it to code their existing curriculum units and say, am I giving, or is this student getting opportunities to build these capabilities over time? It doesn't matter that if their maths teacher doesn't do that one at year 7, but 2 of their other teachers are, they're still getting the capability of the practice and the skill. So there's lots of different ways that you can use that. There's a free course about it that you can go and have a look at. And there's also sort of education partners that we have who sort of lead that. But it's not really a technology course at all. It's more about a disposition about helping teachers to really have a shared understanding and language around those skills and know how to build curriculum that gets kids to practice the muscle. So another disposition I wanted to talk about is the idea of kids actually using tech. And so, you know, I often talk about, VR, AR, MR. Is that BS? You know, have we worked that out yet, or are we all just buying headsets because they're cool? And luckily, they've done some research on this, probably not before many millions of dollars globally were spent on them. But, you know, this does seem like a technology that is going to be here for the future. These augmented reality, virtual reality headsets, mixed reality headsets do actually show some gains in terms of learning retention immediately and after 2 weeks. We see academic performance increase. We see reduced cognitive load when students are using these kinds of tools to help them learn. And so an example of that is Case Western University in the US, where they've sort of, you can see some little video there of using a HoloLens, we call it, to be able to put holograms in the learning environment and allow multiple students to use that to collaborate together. And so that's you know, something that they've certainly been working on and done a huge amount of research in. I should say, actually, during COVID, they shipped out 185 of these HoloLens things to students and taught first year anatomy via hologram. And it was the first time it was done at scale. They had a reduction in the amount of time that students take to learn the anatomical structures down from 7.3 to 4.5 hours by using it this way. They see if you have a cadaver experience as well as a HoloLens kind of experience, they saw an 80% improvement in recall of the terminology. So there's lots of ways that you would sort of supplement that hands-on experience, which is still very crucial with this kind of technology. This is really important though. Students really, we need to think about planning activities for students to create with this technology, not just consume it. Because there's only so much that we can learn from doing, you know, oh, look, I'm looking around at the pyramids, isn't that cool? And so we worked with RMIT, and their architecture students were basically working on, one of the challenges with architecture is that an architect has an idea in their head about what's the way something should look, and then it's got to be reduced down to two-dimensional plans. And then the builder gets it and goes, this doesn't even make any sense. And then the builder's got to turn it back into 3 dimensions. And so using a HoloLens as a sort of visualization tool, they can cut out that plan stage and go straight from 3D to 3D. And so huge amount of work's been done. And it's even, you know, this is the UTS building in Sydney, which is a fantastic building, but the 90% decrease in productivity by bricklayers who aren't laying straight walls. And so we're even seeing University of Tas have done some work, and you can see here that there's sort of like hologram placeholders of where the next bricks go that call the bricklayer there. I mean, it's just, this sort of technology is becoming very real. This is Lawrence here, he's wearing a HoloLens and he's looking at that chair there, and there's no one in that chair, but what he can see in the chair is this guy. And so this is a nursing app that allows this patient actually changes over time and starts sweating profusely, and the vitals change, and then the nursing staff and the doctors who are training are actually trying to sort of mitigate what's going on. We have to understand that kids won't get a job out of having experienced this stuff. We've got to get them creating and thinking and using the technology to kind of build some of this. And so, you know, you can, I mean, this is just Minecraft, right? That lots of kids know about, and lots of great creations happen in there, but the ability to sort of export out in 3 dimensions and then have them use their models, this is on my lounge room floor, but have their models and rotate those around and whatever, because there's huge amount of creativity that they start to build. They think about scale. There's lots and lots of different learnings that come out of those kinds of things. And so there's lots of curriculum out there around STEM activities too. You know, we've even got some, there's the Hacking STEM curriculum, which hooks up to technology. For example, this brain one here, they actually build a helmet thing and then they whack a tennis ball against it and it measures the amount of damage to the brain that might occur and pops it into spreadsheets and all that sort of stuff. But to be brutally honest, it's the unguided activities that kids do after you've done these step-by-step ones that count. The step-by-step ones anyone can do. You know, you just follow the bouncing ball and you step through it. But it's the once they're allowed to go crazy and think, what would you make? That's when the real learning application starts occurring. So we need to have the mindset that while we're doing these sort of STEM activities, think about the idea of when am I going to set them free to actually use the skills we've been developing over time. Another thing that we're very passionate about around mindset is making sure that every person is included. And this is talking to the accessibility needs, the learning inclusive needs, and the ways that technology can support this stuff. And I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but there are some amazing technologies out there that are helping people to live their day-to-day life that we didn't have 10 or 15 years ago through the power of cloud-based technology and artificial intelligence and other things. But actually, Satya Nadella there, you can see the CEO, he has a profoundly disabled child, grew up in the slums of Calcutta, now leads Microsoft, and he says to every organization, what are you doing for education and what are you doing for the inclusive classroom? And so we think about this a lot and talk about this a lot, and we really want to get to the point where we're thinking about equity, not equality. Which doesn't mean, you know, we just need to make sure that everyone is got a level playing field here, and technology can play a role in this. And we sort of think about it in these ways, you know, reading support and writing support and maths and speaking, listening, but there are lots of different ways that we can think about this. And of course, there's more severe you know, disabilities that we might be talking about around, you know, people who can't speak at all, or people who are quadriplegics, who need to use assistive technologies for lots of different purposes. So I'm just going to show you a couple of demos here, because I like to run the risk that my presentations will completely fail. So it just keeps the adrenaline flowing. So this is just I'm just in a OneNote document, and there's a page here, and I'm just going to go to the View tab and see there's this thing called Immersive Reader. One of the tools that we developed, which is actually developed in a staff hackathon. Microsoft have like a hacking sort of a hackathon center, and they've expanded out to run these hackathons where people just make stuff that they're interested in. It keeps that creative culture going, just the same reason you'd have a maker's lab in a school. And one of the things that there was a guy who was who had a nephew who was suffer from dyslexia, and he said our technology's got to be better at supporting that kind of learner. And so what he and his team built was this thing called Immersive Reading, which is now across almost all of our stuff. And it basically changes the view of a page and shows you it in a different format. And so the first thing you'll notice it's done is taken away all distractions, and it uses black background with white writing instead of white with black, because there's some research around that helping the letters stand out on the page is good. And then hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
Basketball's greatest players. There are many great players who had the talent to be all-pro.
So we've got voice, we've got reading out, we've got highlighting of words, and I can change the speed and make it a male voice and whatever I want. But also then we can start to think about, well, how big do I need it? Maybe I'm a student who suffers from visual crowding. I need to space that out a bit. We've got bottom heavy fonts. Sometimes students need this if they have visual impairment. Sometimes we might want to use dots to break up syllables, which they do in some infant books over in Finland and other countries around there. I might want to show all the nouns. I might want to show all the adjectives. I might want to show all the verbs. I might want to color code those. Then I might want to do line focus. If I'm really an emerging reader, I might want to have line focus so that as it goes through...
And lost it in the streets. Probably the two most famous to fail are Lloyd Daniels and Earl Manigault.
I can get that line focus sort of going on, and I can turn that on and off. Another thing that I can do is start looking at the picture dictionary. So it'll allow me to read the word out. If I go to certain words, it sort of gives me the little picture dictionary and allows me to understand what those words are. And then I can get into sort of translating into another language completely by word or an entire document and having that read out in another language for parents. But the point is, if I just push this back arrow, I'm out. I'm looking at the same document I started with. And so these assistive technologies really need to be there to help our students be able to... Students who have individual learning needs will often go without before they'll stand out. And that they would rather not ask for any sort of intervention if they think it's going to be publicly put out there that they've got a challenge. And so we think about this a lot in the way that this technology is designed in. And we partner with an organization called Code Red, who are a sort of a parent group in Australia who really sort of promote for policy and research around dyslexia, and it's a group of really great people who do plenty of work in this space. And there's other tools that we have as well. As a matter of fact, I'll send the slides later on, but this All About Immersive Reader link down the bottom here shows you where all this stuff is across all of the tools that we have. So I'll send the slides later so you can grab these links. And we're so passionate about this as an idea, and that's one tool out of about 20, that we created inclusive classroom parent kits, which is for schools to run parent nights if they're going to use this stuff, because we know we've got an accessibility lead, Troy, on our team, but there's only one human who can't get around to lots of schools. So we've created PowerPoint decks and handouts and stuff. So if you're using Microsoft technology at your school and you want to run these parent nights, then there's stuff for you. Let me pivot a little bit to looking at teachers and thinking about how we can help teachers through technology. There was some research that we did a couple of years ago called Preparing Class of 2030, which was about when prep kids were going to graduate in 2030. And there was lots of different findings in there. And this is a full eye chart of a slide, so apologies, but just focus on that blue circle maybe. Personalized learning can help 70% of students achieve more. 70% of kids, though, are saying whatever the pace is in their current classroom is not right for them. And so this gets me reflecting on my 12 years in the classroom and this notion down here of personalized learning. And I think that while that might be something that we should aspire to, it's very, very difficult, especially in a secondary context. And the reason is that I might teach 100 kids a day for 45 minutes. And so the ability for me to truly get enough data and have enough time to crunch it and assess it to make interventions about where my students are going to go is just a lot of work. And, you know, I heard someone from Akara speak recently, and we were talking about the fact that, you know, about 50% of teachers new teachers leave the profession the first 5 years. And, you know, she was saying maybe that's about the time they realize that the expectations outweigh what is possible. You know, it is really, really hard to do this stuff, but there might be a way that we can use technology to help. So let me talk about that for a second. When we think about analytics, there's descriptive analytics, which is what happened. There's diagnostic, which is why did it happen? There's predictive, which is what do we think will happen out of a set of data across students? And then this is the sort of nirvana up here, which is how can we make something happen or not happen based on what we've learned before? So if you think about a whole school system with 100,000 students in it, chances are a system of data in the background might have seen another student like you before. And it also could know what happened to that student, what trajectory they went on, and what were the interventions that were made that had the most impact on that student, going up or down. And so we spend a lot of time working with large jurisdictions around data projects because there's research to show there's something like 60+ sources of data about every kid in a school, but most of them aren't triangulated. You know, so if I have little Mary in my basketball team and she drops out of the basketball team and she was our center, then my problem is I need to find a new center. But actually, if the system also knew that her grades were on the slide, her truancy was on the way up, she visited the sick bay more than she normally does, and she's had multiple fights with friends, and this is the third social activity she dropped out of, this isn't about basketball. You know, there is a bigger problem here. And all of those data sets exist in the school, but none of them are together. And so when we think about the use of data to help teachers, you know, who's bigger? Well, kind of depends the way you look at it, right? And who's smarter? Well, you know, there's lots of different types of intelligence, and that's pretty hard. And even though their IQ is the same, when we start thinking about pastoral care, who's at greater risk, student A or B? Well, it kind of depends the way you look at it. And then I've got a classroom, right? So I've got 25 kids. What if I've got a couple of classes and I've got 50? What if I'm a year level coordinator and there's like 300 kids in my year level? Or what if I'm a school principal and I need to try and work out something across this? This is really, really challenging for the human brain, but it's not challenging for machines. And so finding patterns across data sets is something that most industry use technology for. And we're starting to see more and more of this artificial intelligence, machine learning come into products that are being used in schools, whether they're sort of LMS products or whether they're platforms like ours or other things. There's lots of possibilities for this. You know, one of the things that we've started doing is providing what's called insights to teachers in teams, which sort of says, you know, this student hasn't been active this week. This student hasn't started their comedies of error tasks because we knew that that's due on Thursday coming up. It's now Monday. I don't know whether she started it. I'm assuming Ella started it, but I don't know. But the system would know. If it was a digital file that hasn't been opened, then it knows. And so therefore it might be able to flag to me and allow me to sort of contact that student. So intelligent sort of systems and platforms might be able to help us moving forward. And then we might be able to have these sort of, you know, dashboards. I think dashboards have become passé before anyone's got a dashboard. You know, what I would have loved would be to walk into a classroom and have my 26 little smiling faces on a screen that I could have pushed one and got some insight about how that student's going. But I want insight across everyone's classes, not just mine. And it might just be trend data. I want to know if their grades are really tanking in my class, but are going perfectly well in everyone else's classes, I need to know that. Or if they're tanking in my class and they're tanking in everyone else's class, I also want to know that. Because maybe it's not the way I'm teaching, maybe it's not they're just having trouble with this topic that I'm teaching them, maybe there is a bigger problem here. And so there's possibility too, and we've seen some work out of Catholic Education WA, where they've focused a lot on this idea of sentiment and students telling teachers via little emojis on their sort of interface there of, you know, how am I feeling today? And so there's a lot of work around social and emotional research going on. And we know that emotions are the gatekeepers to cognition. We know that students who have that sense of agency have an increased self-efficacy, that they think that they can meet these big goals, that they think the locus of control describes how impactful am I on meeting these goals, or is it just some external source that's, you know, going to impact whether I make it or not? Better mental health. We've seen the PISA data across Latin America be the biggest jump in terms of overall academic scores. And one of the reasons for that, it's put down to the fact that they really did start to explicitly teach emotional literacy to kids. And so there's lots of different work that's going on in this space around emotion and cognition, and thinking about how technology plays a role in this. And so a teacher might end up with a dashboard that sort of says, oh, you know, Alex, were we showing signs of apprehension? If I drill in a bit, then what is it that's causing this apprehension? Show me more data. I need to know a bit more about it, because I teach 100 kids today. You know, I can't possibly know. Got a sense something's not right, but show me some data. And so it might, you know, this pending work list could be 15 items in it. And so that's a real challenge, right? Because now I need to go to Alex and say, hey, mate, how's you managing your workload? Because you've got a lot on. And so someone having a visibility or a view that there is a lot on is a great help for Alex, who might be able to get some intervention. We've got to start thinking about, and we are thinking about, how we can use technology smarter to take the load off teachers and allow teachers to intervene in a more positive way. So things, you know, sentiment analysis is coming into products, and we see that all the time. You can have them anonymized or not, but there's certainly some students here you should tap on the shoulder and see how they're traveling. We know that, you know, in wrapping up, we know that students are the future. This student here I saw present on stage at one of our, what we call our E2 conferences in Paris last year. And she was a 15-year-old student who was working with a company who are working on quantum computing, which I can't even start to describe to you. It's like 50,000 times more powerful than the current computing we have. And there's quantum computers that currently exist now, and they're going to shape our future. But she's actually working with some of the scientists and at quantum computing companies because of her passion in the space and her brilliance in her thinking. And so we know we've got to get behind the students. And I'll come back to this idea of getting kids to use real world tools early. I spoke about the STEM idea of starting to think about the kind of dispositions that creates and getting them thinking, but they're not going to get a job out of it. I also think that by the time kids are in year 9 or 10, we should be starting to use some real world technologies with them that are used by the industries. We do it in graphic design. We do it with Photoshop and Illustrator and other things, but we don't seem to do it in IT. And so we've got a real huge skill shortage in this space in Australia and globally around these kinds of skills. So I wanted to show you a little video. It goes for about 2 seconds. And I'll see if you can hear what the girls say. And if you can't, I'll repeat it anyway. But let me just jump to that.
Well, we just built a system to predict breast cancer.
So, sorry, you did what? We just built a system to predict breast cancer. Now, this was a piece of work that we did at Seymour College in Adelaide. And we thought it was going to be a year 11 project with IT kids, because we were starting to train them on something called machine learning, which is, you know, algorithms and sets of data and seeing whether it can learn more and yada, yada, yada. These were year 8 kids, and they could do it. And the reason they could do it is because the interface is now designed in like a draggy droppy kind of way. It's no longer coding. And so the barrier to access around this level of thinking, where we could give these guys some data sets and they could create a system or a model that predicted breast cancer in a set of data, they were able to do it in half a day. And so we do have to sort of aspire for more and think about ways that we can use technology to get kids doing great things. And then we, as a vendor, like a Microsoft, need to think about how we can start to help teachers to do things in a different way. I'll just finish with this little story here. There's a thing in technology called skeuomorphics. And skeuomorphics is the idea that the first thing we do when we get new technology is try and do what we did before we had it with that technology. And so a classic example was when we first got iPads and we started doing book reading. You roll your finger across it and it turns like a page and it sounds like a page. You know, so there's lots of different examples of it. This is a car as an example. This is a fully electric car. It doesn't need a front grille. They don't need air intake, but it kind of has a front grille because that's what we expect cars to have. What about if we could start thinking about adaptive content? I'm going to use the idea of digital textbooks here because it's something we can all sort of put in our head. If we can get the technology right, why can't a digital textbook be aware of where every single kid in your classroom is at and show them different content? It's just stuff on a screen, right? But why are we all seeing the same stuff on a screen? Because, you know, David might be working 25% ahead of where I am. So why am I seeing what he's seeing? Why is he seeing what I'm seeing? What if it understood the zone of proximal development? Because we can train that into a model so that it knows how far to push David so he doesn't sort of tip over the edge and freak out, but he's getting enough sort of extension to move to that point. And so am I, but I'm sort of working a bit behind him. What if the system also knew that I suffer from visual crowding? So why isn't it automatically fixing that for me? It doesn't seem very hard to render a different page that has more space between letters or uses black with white. And what if it could do that for every individual student? So I think that there's real possibilities in some of the stuff I've spoken about. If we have the right mindset around what the technology is serving us in education, I think there's some huge possibilities for us to use this technology moving forward. And with that, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you found something useful in there. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Travis. That was amazing. Very, very exciting times, and certainly for the learning and teaching side of me, very hopeful for the future. So this is fantastic. We do have a few questions. Travis, I wonder if you're happy for people to unmute themselves to ask. Okay,
that'd be great.
Well, can I invite questions? And I believe that the first question should be from Andrea. Are you happy to turn your camera on and your mic on and ask us a question?
Yes.
Great. Hi, Andrea.
Hello. Sorry, I've got a couple of screens going on here, but my question was sort of back at the beginning there, Travis, and it might be something that is not really relevant to unpack, but you mentioned something in relation to, I'm just scrolling back myself because it was about coding. Coding curriculum. What you meant by coding existing curriculum.
Oh yeah, sorry, that was in reference to the 21 CLD approach.
Yeah.
And so what you can do with that approach, so let me just bring that slide up again because I can tell you with a visual that way. So for example, let's say you're looking at a group project that you're working on and you're trying to code it for collaboration. Does this task truly build collaboration skills in kids? Coding it means, does it do this? Yes, keep going. Does it do this? Yes, keep going. Does it not do that? Oh, that's a 2. So this task actually sits at a 2. The question then for curriculum design is, how do we get that to be a 4? Because these are a sequence. And the further down there we go, the more likely it is to build the muscle of collaboration if kids get to experience it more. And so, yeah, coding, sorry, that was a confusing use of the term. Coding in this sense means,
using rubrics to.
Yeah, using a rubric to assess it, really, yeah. Good question.
Thanks, Andrea. Bernadette, are you happy to ask your question? Bernadette has a question about pre-service teachers.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Bernadette. If you could unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Loud and
clear. Yeah. Well, I actually retired at the end of last year, which was probably the best decision I ever made given COVID. But listening to all of this is just, I'm still thoroughly engaged in all of it. And I just think back to my own teacher training when we did come out writing our own courses of study. This is something that needs to be built into education for pre-service teachers.
Yeah.
It's not something that, as you say, you can't presume because they're digital natives that they're going to know how to do this. A lot of what you're saying, I'm relating back to what we used to sort of do manually with the working out where the child is and developing their personal learning plan and leading them on that. But it has to go deeper than that. It's got to be something that becomes part of the norm, I feel. And how do we best do that? How do we get the lecturers into the universities to train the teachers?
Yeah, really good question, Bernadette, and an area of passion for me, because I used to teach the psychology method at Monash Uni, so training psychology teachers. And I used to run this 3-hour tute, which was showing them practical ways to use technology in the learning and strategies that they could use. and they would walk, this was, you know, a few years ago, and they would walk out and come up to me and say, why are we the only ones, because we've got you as a lecturer, seeing this? And so I think universities are better than they were now, because they do have, you know, more of a focus on this stuff. It is a challenge sometimes to get this done, but we certainly are working with many big universities around the country to provide, you know, I mean, we've got free training everywhere that, you know, in teacher voice, not like how do I use Word and stuff, but, you know, integration technology stuff. How do I, you know, teaching the sustainability goals using, you know, with some technology activities, you know, lots of good sort of pedagogy stuff. And so we're working really closely with pre-service teacher departments around the country to make sure that, I mean, training teachers get exposed to this stuff. And so Google should do the same, and Apple and whoever else should all do the same. Because when a teacher comes out of university, they often might understand the theory of it, but then they go, oh, technology tools, don't really know how that fits into the story, and they need some experience in that. So that's what we do.
The other issue with that, of course, is when you mentor a new teacher coming into the system, we oldies don't have that knowledge as such to pass on to them. So we become the newbies,
true.
really.
And I often talked about if we could get the university bit right in terms of you know, newer teachers coming out with an understanding of digital pedagogy, like how to use the stuff to make activities more rich. And then they go into schools and there's reverse mentoring going on. Because, you know, you, the oldies, the experienced peeps, would be able to sort of say, hey, this is what great teaching and learning looks like. This is what great classroom management looks like. This is what great pedagogy looks like. I've got some tools that I think might make that even more awesome. And then you get this nice area in the middle. But I think you're right. There's a bit of a challenge there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good question.
I can see David's going to make a comment or ask a question. David, I'll get you to unmute your mic. There we go.
Yes, my question is, given the long history we've had technology, why is it that technology only supports really government or then perhaps principals or then teachers, but doesn't really support students? So I really like your presentation today. I've learned a lot because I'm really getting out of touch with the whole scene, but it's still saying to me that our money is on Big Brother looking over my shoulder rather than support for the young person to grow, to take control, to be, in charge of their own learning. And that may be oversimplifying it, but I can still feel that. And still, in those early days, the people that wanted to sell us machines were people wanting us to have Big Brother in the school, and we said, no, no, no.
Yeah, I agree, David. And so, I mean, one of the things that I often talk about is the link between the cognitive science of learning and the role of a device, for example, with a stylus in it. And so, could have done that as a presentation today, but the idea there would be to really sort of focus on what is learning, how do people learn, and how does technology enhance that thing called learning? Because what I realized in my teaching in a one-to-one classroom is that 95% of the stuff I delivered to kids was in a digital format. But we know all of the research about reading for understanding, about thinking, the way we problem solve, the way we hypothesize, being completely hindered by a keyboard experience. And so when we take it down into classroom level experience, there are real tangible ways that technology can be used to enhance thinking that students may not otherwise get. So I often show in that presentation an ECG from a mate of mine was studying medicine at Adelaide Uni, and he's got an ECG there with scribbled stuff all over it. And when you unpack that in terms of the cognitive science, that strategy is a brilliant one. Leads to greater depth of processing, increased understanding, connection to existing ideas. He also uses things like non-linguistic visuospatial markings, which are circles, question marks, underlines, you know, all that sort of stuff that we take for granted if we're learning in a non-digital world, that we lose when we move into a digital technology world with the wrong kind of technology. So I agree with you that there's lots of the Big Brother stuff out there. You know, the data stuff is really about understanding more about how we can intervene better as teachers, because taking the legwork off teachers is really important. You know, we used to use a product called Dino at school, DYKNOW or something. there were two parts to this. One was the teaching and learning side, where you could sort of have shared sort of slides that went to the kids' computers and they could interact with you and you could do auto polling. And that was back in the sort of, you know, mid 2005-ish. But then the other whole side of it is what you described, David, which is the big brother is watching, lock everything down, don't be creative, control the machine, you know, kind of side of it. And we turned that off. I said, that's classroom management. Like we don't need the technology to do that bit. We want you to focus on creative pedagogies, which are going to enhance learning for kids. And so there are absolutely some challenges with that, but you know, there are tangible ways that technology can make a difference for kids if used appropriately, and sometimes not used inappropriately is more important.
Can I just follow that up just a little bit?
Yeah.
So we're looking at agency. How do I give a student agency? And of course, ThinkPlus is all about doing that, just the agency bit. So if you took that situation where someone else in my situation had success, rather than telling the teacher about the other students so they could then do it, how can I as a student say, find someone who's been in a place like me, who wants to get to there, so that I can learn from their successes and mistakes? Or I don't know, it seems that we're not doing enough to come within them. I mean, I think you're right that we use technology really to gather information rather than to really grow and learn and create. But you know, Google does answer a lot of questions. So I find myself asking Google, how can I do this? Where can I go there? And so more of that in terms of development of the technology.
One of the projects that we're working on, which is at higher education, so just put a little asterisk beside this in terms of K-12, is something called Project Lagro, we call it. And it's basically using LinkedIn and looking at skills mapping of tertiary students. And so LinkedIn has a huge database, for example, of what kind of jobs are out there, what kind of capabilities people have when they're in jobs, you know, what kind of training they did before they got that job, you know, all that sort of stuff. And so Project Lagro is a product that we're working on at the moment, a research project where students can use an interface to sort of say, I'm aspiring to be a mechanical engineer. And it looks through the alumni of their university and says, here's 50 people who are leading mechanical engineers that went to this university. And then it allows you to drill in and say, what sort of skill sets do they have that I'm going to need? And it creates a list of those. And then it looks at your own profile and says, you've only got 4 of these 10 skills that employers are looking for and that these people have. And so how about you start to take some learning pathways or think about how to connect with the alumni to try and build the other 6 capabilities that you seem to be low on that the industry is after. So I think that's maybe maybe I'm drawing a long bow, David, but it's a step in the right direction to think about, you know, mapping skills, working out where are my capabilities and where are my gaps, and allowing them to be owners of the next bit, giving them the agency, I suppose. Now, obviously, that the reason I said put an asterisk beside it is because that's LinkedIn. It's you know, it's a work tool and it's for older people. But yeah, I think you're right about getting that technology in the hands of learners to say, who else can I tap on the shoulder to help me with this because they've been through the same challenge I've been, is a great idea.
Travis, just on that point, do you think that might be what people are talking about when they're talking about micro-credentialing at the moment?
Yeah, we hear a lot about micro-credentialing, especially at universities, of course, with the amount of disruption that's happened in the higher education market with the international students and so on and so forth. We definitely see a lot about micro-credentialing. We see a lot of universities thinking differently about how to offer degrees or qualifications that are made up of a choose your own adventure kind of learning, as opposed to a you come and do this arts